Can you be the best in the world at any skill? No. Can I learn any skill? Of course I can. Of course you can too. And the idea that you can't is like this delusional self-protective belief. But it's not because I do anything particularly, advocating anything novel. Like there is no special insight. It's like practice things, reflective, deliberate practice, develop skills in an arbitrary direction. If you don't believe me, if you don't agree with that, go try literally anything. I promise it'll work.
This is Audience of One, and I'm your host, Spencer Keir. This podcast is a venue for me to follow my curiosity through conversations with leading thinkers and builders. My guest today is Emmett Shear. Emmett is the co-founder and former CEO of Twitch and a visiting partner at Y Combinator. We talk about agency, meta-learning, deliberate practice, coordination problems, parasocial relationships, positive-sum games, and more. Please enjoy. So back in March, you announced that you were leaving Twitch. That's a pretty significant decision for somebody who's been with the company, including the time when it was called Justin TV for 16-ish years. So I'm always curious about people's thought processes when they make big decisions like that. Are there heuristics you found for knowing when to stay the course on something versus make a big decision or change it in a big direction like that?
I think you have to make one of two errors. You're either going to stay in things too long or you're going to not stay long enough. And especially in startups, under persisting tends to be a bigger problem than over persisting. And so I think that in general, in startups, people should bias towards really persisting longer and be willing to live with the fact that means that they might stick with things longer than they have to, because the alternative is not sticking with things long enough. And that's a much bigger killer in startups, because almost everything I know that has succeeded went through some phase, both Justin TV and Twitch went through multiple phases like this, where it didn't look like it was going to work necessarily. And if you give up just because the odds don't seem super great at that very moment, you're basically guaranteeing failure. Whereas like, if you persist a little too long, you might get 4 shots on goal instead of 5. But like, that's a survivable downside. I would say that rule probably changes if you have a different set of trade-offs. So like, I think people who are climbing the corporate ladder probably, I would guess, undershift jobs on average, because I think if you're climbing the corporate ladder, the temptation, it's easy to just go for the promotion at your current job. The temptation is not to rock the boat. It's relatively straightforward, but actually, the people I know who are most aggressive about their career and most successful at it jump jobs with fair regularity. Not every 1 or 2 years, but like fairly regular. They don't spend 15 years in one job. That's too long. And so I think it probably varies based on your domain quite a bit. But speaking for startups, my heuristic is persist longer than you think seems wise, because your bias is so strongly to give up because it was going to look like it sucks. In my case, I decided to finally leave because I didn't feel I was needed anymore. I felt like Twitch was doing well, and especially after the last few years, we'd grown so much. It felt like Twitch was really on a great trajectory. I felt like I had a solid team, and to be honest, it didn't seem like the company would die if I left. And that's a really weird feeling from a startup.
That's a bittersweet feeling.
Yeah. When you've been running a startup for a while, the whole time, like if you leave, it dies. Like it's dependent on you. And then at some point, if you succeed, it's not dependent on you. And once it wasn't dependent on me, I realized like I actually have a bunch of other things I want to do. Like this is really important to me that I get this right. But now that it's right, do I need to be the one who like shepherds it through the next 10 years? And like, I could be. I don't think I'd be bad at it, but I don't think I'm required either. And so then once I realized that, I think other things became more exciting. And I was having a son. And so with having my first child, it really, I think, called into question where do I want to prioritize my time? Like being a CEO of a big company, if you want to do a good job anyways, is like very time demanding. Do I really want that? And so I think that was the proximate thing. But like, if the company had still needed me, I might have tried to find a way to make it work with having a child. But then it's sort of the combination of those two things together.
What was it that you felt like uh, you would be able to do for your son in terms of attention or resources or support that you wouldn't have been able to do if you stayed on with Twitch? And there's the obvious
Yeah.
consideration with just time, but I imagine there's particular things you felt motivated to do.
No, it really is time. I mean, it's time and flexibility, right? Like when you're working on something like Twitch, you have to take a lot. There's a lot of meetings. There's a lot of fairly rigid schedule, and if you move your schedule around a lot, it thrashes an entire company. And so you can, but you really have to not care about the people around you very much if you do that. And so I just decided, it really comes down to time. If I had 48 hours in the day, maybe I'd just do both. I don't think there's like a I don't think there's any one specific thing I wouldn't get to do. Because with any one specific thing, I could carve out it could be compatible. I could carve out time for that one specific thing
Right.
and figure out a way to make it happen. Um, it's the it's having flexibility. It's when something is happening, I can jump on it. I think that's the real win.
In a complex and rapidly changing future, I'm curious, and this is a two-part question. One is, what are the skills and mindsets you're hoping to cultivate in your son? And two is, what's the environment that you feel like is optimal for doing so? And you've written a little bit on Twitter about seeing the deteriorating public education environment, at least from a cost perspective. And so I imagine you're maybe thinking about alternatives like home and micro and online schooling, but curious about first the skills and mindsets, and second, the environment.
Yeah. I actually don't know that I think public schools are getting worse per se. I think that they're getting dramatically less efficient. And and they're worse than the counterfactual public school that could exist if we spent the money efficiently. But it seems to me like you're sort of getting a constant level of output and like an exponential increase in the
Right.
amount of resources, which is different. So I'm not necessarily against public schooling, but I do think um, the one of the issues is there's an increasing premium over time on what I think of as meta skills because when you were growing up, when I was growing up, and even more so when my parents were growing up, like learning how to cook, if you wanted to do it at a high level, required you go learn from someone who knew how to cook really well. And that meant like there's like a substantial upfront cost to doing that. I can go learn from some of the best chefs in the world and watch them cook on YouTube, like right now.
Right.
Like the availability of material to self-teach has never been higher. Like you can bootstrap yourself not only into academic skills, but into physical skills and even emotional skills. Like almost everything is there if you have the meta skill of go find the material that and know how to teach yourself it, know how to practice it, know how to make it real for yourself. You don't need any kind of formal education at all, actually. Like, it's all replaceable. Now, one of the best ways to get that meta skill is in a formal education context. Like, I learned a lot about how I learn through schooling. So this isn't like an anti-school thing. It's just sort of recognizing that it used to be there's a bunch of things you had to go to school for. It's just not true anymore. You don't. And therefore, I'm much more focused on questions of do you know how to learn? If there's a skill you want, to acquire it. Do you know how to lead and follow in a group? Do you know how to uh, do you know how to figure out what it is that you actually want, what your goals truly are? Because that turns out to be a really easy question to fail. And the more powerful the tools you have are, the more able you are to achieve those things, which technology makes us more and more able every year, the higher and higher premium is placed on knowing what you want and being able to self-direct to go get it. And so I don't think schools as they're currently designed are optimized around these things. Um, and so I don't know, but my son's only 5 months old. By the time that he's ready to go to school, there may be availability and I don't, maybe I don't have to go solve it myself. Like we
Right.
have plenty of time. By the time he's in high school, it'll be 20, what, like 2037 or something. So like, I don't know what schools in 2037 will look like. So it's possible there's something off the rack that I can go get. But right now, I would say if I had to put him into school today, I would
Yeah.
consider some kind of homeschooling or some sort of I don't know, but micro schooling, I presume, is some sort of like parents banding together and making their own kind of micro homeschool. Um, I would consider alternative options like that because I don't know of any like at least no middle school or high school that I think is doing a great job today. I do know of some. To be honest, I think Montessori does a pretty decent job at elementary. Like I actually honestly don't. A well-run Montessori school, I think, is like within 30 degrees of the right answer. So like that's a it, it's it becomes a bigger problem, I think, as the kids get older.
One of those meta skills you were hinting at is agency. And you've said on Twitter before that you think not only can you teach people agency, but that you've done it yourself a couple of times. And it's effectively a process of, and I'm simplifying
Mhm.
this, but a repeated process of questioning their assumptions and making them think about the first kind of marginal step they can take. Um, I'm curious why you think more people aren't agentic, and if that's kind of humanity's default, or if it's a learned behavior and maybe it's kind of it's suppressed or beaten out of them through school or culture.
What you're trying to do with agency when you're trying to teach agency isn't so much you be able to question their assumptions, although that's I think that's one of the most important tools you use along the way. It's that people have this setting, this like this hyper prior about themselves that informs all their priors about all kinds of things, including new priors that they invent on the spot, new assumptions. And the hyper prior is sort of like, it, do I believe that coming up with a reasonable plan, like just if I just try to come up with a reasonable plan and then I like attempt to execute on the plan, and then if it doesn't work, I just like see what isn't there and I just do it again until it works. Do I believe that will work? Like in my heart, do I really believe that will work? Do I believe that I can get results that whatever result I want will probably come about if I just keep doing it? And most people in their heart believe the answer to that question is no. They don't they run into things all the time where they're like, "Well, I would like that, but I don't see a pathway to it that is like meets some bar for like likelihood of success, and so I'm just like not gonna try." Like what it feels like on the inside is not I'm not gonna try. It feels like I can't even imagine how you would do that. I can't see a
Right.
pathway. And like you can see a pathway is the this is the this is the what the teaching does over and over again is like force them to stare at the fact that there is a pathway, that you can see it, that you might fail, but there is a pathway there and you could try. And like the worst that happens is you don't succeed basically in most of the time. And if there's some big risk, you could try to reduce the risk. And then you could try. Like you can always recurse again and you can always
Hmm.
try. Oh, if you're missing a skill, we could go learn the skill. And then like, I think that's all well, you're missing a skill or it's too risky. That's like an excuse. Like most of the time, the kinds of things people are failing to be agentic at, the things they're failing to act on, they're are not particularly risky and they're not missing any skills. Actually, anybody can just go do it. Um, and the barriers are much more um, this hyper priority, you believe in yourself, and then um, willingness to fail. Like there's a how painful is rejection for you? It's the same thing. If you listen to the people who like try to teach pickup artistry, there's a bunch of bullshit they teach. But there's one thing they teach that's really, really true, which is like if you want people to say yes, you have to be okay with them saying no. And if you go into a conversation being terrified of rejection and being not okay with the person you're hitting on telling you no, you are guaranteeing failure. First of all, you won't do it because it's too scary. And second of all, even if you do it, you'll be graspy and like and tight and tense about it, and they'll say no. And the same thing is true fundamentally for solving problems. If you go in and like failure at achieving your goal is unacceptable, and when you do this, it's got to work. Well, first you're not going to try. That's terrifying. And so there's a little bit. It's like this emotional work of like being not of courage, of being not terrified of of failure and gaining the courage to do it. And that has to be paired then with the belief that it's possible, because you have plenty of courage. And if you can't see the pathway, you see people do this sometimes, very sad, where they have a courage, they have sufficient courage, but they don't point it at real plans. Which, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but they don't point it at real plans, and then that also doesn't work. So you kind of need both. And the issue is that these things are not, you can tell someone this and they will nod at you, but the nodding isn't, they haven't really, their internal belief hasn't really shifted. They don't really see themselves differently. That's like actually very hard to shift. That's a very expensive, time consuming thing, which is good actually. Like you don't want to, it is a good thing that people do not have direct write access to their own hyperpriors. People would destroy their own minds very rapidly if they could edit things at will. You would make all kinds of bad decisions. It's good that it takes lots of persistent efforts over time, even if it's a little frustrating. But it does mean like you need years of pressure. I wonder, I don't know. I've never tried it. I've never tried creating a school for it, right? Like maybe I've only seen people learn it over like many, many years, like 7 to 10 years. Maybe you could do it in 2 years if there was like a focused school or something, but like not a week. That's like, there's no way. It's not a skill you can learn in that kind of a time period.
One of the other meta skills that you also hinted at is this idea of meta learning, or the art of learning. In another podcast interview, you said that there's no skill you could not learn. And I think that on the note of the previous topic, that speaks to your sense of agency. Do you feel like you have some special insight about the art of learning that maybe others don't?
No, like I really don't think I do. The the people who don't believe this honestly haven't tried. Like, can you be the best in the world at any skill? No. There are many skills I will never be the best in the world at. Can I learn any skill to a like competency level where I can kind of do it? Of course I can. Of course I can. Of course you can too. And the idea that you can't is like this delusional, like self-protective belief. But it's not because I do anything particularly, I mean, advocate anything novel, like practice. There's this meme online of like, do 100 of those, right? Like draw 100 owls. If you don't know how to draw an owl in the beginning, I promise you by the time if you actually put pen to paper and you truly attempt to draw an owl 100 times and do your best each time, and every time you finish, like reflect a little on that last owl and how could I have made it more owl-like in the way that I want? By owl 100, I promise you, your 100th owl will be like a pretty fine. Like maybe even actually quite good, depending on how much your raw talent you have. And like the people who disagree with this have not tried the experiment. They have not drawn 100 owls, but like, that's just like, it's one of these beliefs. It's so funny because it's like people who disagree with some of the insights of meditation. And it's like, I don't need to argue with you about this. Have you tried sitting down and like just allowing your thoughts to flow without attempting to either stop or not stop them for a while? Like, have you ever done that for like 30 minutes? Okay. If you not like, just first try it, then we'll talk. But like, because you can come with all kinds of crazy theories about how it should work, but then there's just like the fact of like empirically it does in fact work. And like, that's how I feel about the skill learning thing. I don't have any special insight. There is no special insight. It's like practice things, reflective, deliberate practice, develop skills in an arbitrary direction. Go. If you don't believe me, if you don't agree with that, go try literally anything. I promise it'll work.
The commonality here seems to be a bias towards experimentation or action.
The
one point
the other thing about the real thing that people, of course, why it doesn't work, the reason why you can't learn the skill, kind of goes back to the agency thing. You won't actually draw 100 owls. Like the people who say this have the general experience themselves. It's true in their case. When they try to do this, they get discouraged on owl 5 and give up. And yeah, of course, if you don't do it, it won't work. That's also true.
I think in addition to that bottleneck, I think there's another bottleneck at least theoretically, which is people don't know what they actually like or want to do. And partially you solve that through experimentation, but I think it's also through introspection. You had this quote that was something like, or maybe you took this from somebody else, but it was the most common reason aspiring authors fail to finish a book is they don't actually like writing. So in addition to the advice we just spoke about, what's your advice for people trying to find their thing? And if it is as simple as just, arbitrary experimentation in a particular direction, how do you know which experiments to prioritize?
This is like the this is the essence of sort of self-improvement therapy shit that everybody uh has all this advice for. And like I've seen people find this stuff in different ways, and that there isn't like a one thing you want. You want lots of things, and you like lots of stuff, and you like it in varying amounts, and the amounts you like it change over time. So it's one of these never-ending like. There's no, you don't figure it out and then you're done. It evolves over time, um, and like it relies on there's some underlying things like not lying to yourself, like not being honest, being willing to be honest with yourself and see what you want, and not override that with an idea of what you should want. Though one of the most common reflexes is what you should want. But yeah, I think a little bit of being empirical about it is important. I think you're trying to build a sensitivity to just noticing when you did something and it was really fun, and when you did something and it was kind of a slog, and just like paying attention to that over time and noticing like, oh, I love the meetings where I get to, you know, uh, I love the process of leading up to an event where I get to like bring it all together, and like the throwing the event, like when I threw that event, it was super fun. Or for me, it's like I really like uh getting to get into the deep nitty gritty of like product strategy, of like conversion rates and cohorts, and trying to figure out what's really going on. Like I really enjoy that. Um the problem there's That's helpful. It has problems like no one likes playing piano for the first 6 months they play the piano. It sucks. You're not any good at it. There's a bunch of things where, like you have to like get past some initial competency barrier. And in those, you just kind of have to have the idea that like maybe yes, you have to kind of think you maybe would want it, and then kind of push through it. And then when you get to the end of the pushing, you actually find out whether you did or not. And then you have to move back into sensitivity. And so it gets, I don't know, there's not like there's not a single good answer for it. I think the most common single problem is fundamentally um, people confusing what they think it would be good to like, or what they think other people want them to like, or what would be prestigious to like, or what will make a lot of money, with like what they actually like. And you can usually solve for both, actually. Like if you want to make a lot of money, you can usually find a way to do the thing you want to do. Not usually, not always, but usually there's at least one thing you really like that can also make money, and you can like bring them together. But like first you have to not lie to yourself and tell yourself, "Oh, I love doing corporate law because it makes money." First, you have to be honest with yourself. And like I guess I'm not even saying you shouldn't ever do things you don't like. I should do things I don't like all the time for instrumental reasons. Um, I try to avoid it often, but like sometimes the right thing to do is to push through and just do the thing you don't want to do, because it's like instrumentally valid to do so. What I what I'm really saying is like, if you're doing that, don't lie to yourself. Like if you're honest with yourself and you're saying like, I want to sacrifice 80 hours a week of my life for 10 years to make money as a corporate lawyer, and this is the plan, it's what I want to do. Like, and you're biting that bullet and you still want to do it, it's probably a good idea. Like you're probably right. That's like the right trade-off for you. I don't know. Like I would not stand to judge someone and tell them they're making the wrong decision.
Hmm.
I just think when you do it, don't tell yourself, "Oh, I love this corporate law stuff," if you don't. Um, so yeah, I guess that I generally think there's an interesting theme along this. Like, there's no royal road. There's no road to the best way to learn, or the best way to like figure this out. Like, people ask me like, how did you become? I became a pretty decent manager over time, and I did that by realizing it was a skill, and realizing I had to get good at it, and then practicing it and trying it, and like reading everything I could find, and I got coaching, and I took feedback and I self-reflected and I experimented and tried things. I did all of those things. I didn't do just one of them. And if you really care about figuring out what is it that you really like and you take the problem seriously, you'll try a bunch of different stuff and some of it will work. And then and then you will know more than you did when you started.
Right. Understanding that there's no royal road here, how do you decide when to take kind of conventional wisdom at face value versus no, you need to learn through experience or kind of first principles?
Um, I think those things are often in tension where there's a sort of a default answer. And then when you think about it for yourself, you're like, but that's not the answer I would get. And I think you have to ask yourself when you run into that conflict, like, where did this conventional answer come from? Who are the people who came up with it? What's the mimetic environment it has survived in and why has it
Mhm.
survived? And if the answer is like, well, this is how every society throughout history, like small talk, people who are like small talk is bullshit and shouldn't exist. And like small talk is not a novel thing, like in one subset of society. It's like small talk has existed as far as I can tell in all societies of which we are aware, there is some version of small talk. That's like pretty strong evidence that there's something happening there. And if you don't understand it, that's a statement about you, not about the small talk. But
It
and
doesn't
so
make
like,
it any more fun.
yeah. And so I think that then like, well, actually, I think it's really, so small talk's actually a great example of this. It turns out it can be super fun. If you're not enjoying your small talk, we don't have to you don't have to do small talk forever. That gets boring. But like, if you can't enjoy, you know, 120 seconds of small talk, you're doing it wrong. Like, it's not that bad. It's actually, you're probably unskilled at small talk because you haven't practiced it or tried it. Like, try doing it and you'll probably learn that it's actually more fun than you realize. You give it that first few months of practice and see, can you get really good at small talk? And can you get good at transitioning from small talk to a deeper conversation? Um, and I guess what I would say is if you want to throw away something like small talk, it's the Chesterton's fence reasoning. If you want to throw away small talk or any other sort of, load bearing thing that's conventional wisdom, um, if you can tell me a good reason why small talk's a great idea and people do small talk for a reason, by all means, skip it. But if you don't understand the purpose of small talk or why it exists, and it seems like it should, for as far as you can tell, small talk shouldn't exist at all. You obviously have missed, like, clearly you've missed something. People are doing it for a reason. Um, and so maybe you should think more about that before you try to, you know, cr- eliminate small talk for our societies in general. I wouldn't say, like, if you want to experiment for yourself, fine. But like, before you try to like social engineer anything, um,
Right.
at a more personal level, like, when do I decide at my own individual level that I want to go with? I don't know. It's just judgment. I don't think there's any specific special rule. Like, I've got a plan. It's based on some set of principles that I have some level of belief in. And some things I'm like really sure of. And like, if they don't work, I'm like, it would be very, very surprising. And some things I'm like, moderately sure of, but like, damn it if I know. Like, and then sometimes, and then also the conventional wisdom is of certain strengths. Certain things are like nigh universal. Certain things are like, seem like they're almost like 60-40. And so you sort of compare how strong they are and go with the one that's stronger. And if I was picking a database for my next startup, I'd probably go with something that had been gets used by a lot of people already, like Postgres or something.
Yeah.
Cause like,
There's a lendiness to it.
it's just like, I doubt they're actually using it. They probably know more than I do. Even if the other ones look better, like, I'm probably wrong. Um, that's not a generalized statement about people picking databases. Like, there are situations where you should pick a new database that is not the more commonly used one. And it was that situation, you would know it because you'd be like, no, 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 this conventional wisdom, like, you'd have really good reasons. I don't have those reasons. So I don't choose it. So I don't know that there's like I think in general, there's not, I think that's really the one of the main things. There isn't a general rule. I think looking for the general rule is almost a
Hmm.
mistake.
Zooming out for a second, you recently turned 40. You've gone through a handful of startups. You recently had a son. Um, I'm curious if you've noticed any kind of progression or evolution in kind of the macro maps of reality that you've used to kind of interact with the world. Like if there's any underlying axioms that you've changed your mind about over the course of time that have led to whether it's success or just a different perspective on how to interact with the world.
Yeah. I remember when I was really young, I first ran into like money. And I was like, why do we have money? That seems dumb. Like I was an automatic naive communist. Why don't we just like, why don't people like my dad? I knew my dad was a lawyer. I was like, why did my dad just do lawyer stuff? I didn't quite understand what it meant, but I knew he was like, that was a thing he did of value to other people. Why doesn't he just do lawyer stuff? And then like the grocery store should just give us food. And like, why do we need all this money to keep track? I don't get it.
Mm,
Like it's, we'd be reasonable. They'd be reasonable. It'll be fine. And as I got older, I think when I remember arguing with a bunch with my friend Ira about this, and we're grappling with this problem and taking various sides of sort of these, 14-year-old intellectual debates, which are hilarious. And eventually realizing like, oh, you need to figure out like how much of which stuff should you make and put where, and like how much should each person consume of each kind of thing. And like, this is how, and so it finally hit me, it dawned on me how complicated the whole thing was. Like how many things needed to be coordinated and how you trying to solve that in like and I kind of saw, oh, that if you could calculate the right answer, it would wind up looking a lot like the money answer. Like in de
mm,
facto, people would wind up doing largely, not 100%, but largely the same jobs and consuming largely the same stuff. The median person, maybe not billionaires and maybe not people at the very bottom, but like 70 or 80% of society went up doing the same thing. And I was like, oh, I see. It's like, this is how we try to calculate the answer. Like, this is the way you get the coordination to figure out the answer to the question of like, the grocery store will just give us the food. Yeah, that's exactly what happens. The grocery store does just give you
yeah.
the food. Like, that's how it works. But like, how do you figure out how much where? Oh, money. And then I remember I was starting my startup and we were first like, why do we need managers? Managers seem like people should do the work. And like you have I understand the CEO, like leadership. I understand that. You need someone to like, we have a vision and a direction and they kind of say where we're going. But like, why would you need like middle management? Like someone whose whole job is managing people and they report to someone who's managing them. Like, what's their job? Like, why does it even exist? And kind of trying it without that and it not really working and trying to understand why and eventually coming to realize like, oh, like it's like the money thing again. Like to get everybody pointed in the right, like, what if we didn't have managers? Well, we still like, we need to do, and you kind of wind up coming up with all these things that need to happen. And we'll distribute those tasks among people. And you realize like, oh, we've recreated management with a different, like a bunch of extra steps, but we have a manager again. And kind of realizing like hierarchy was another technique like money. That's a way of getting people organized and coordinated. And so I would almost describe like most of my dawning understandings of the world. I had the same thing with democracy where I was like, wait, why do we need democracy? Like at first I was like, oh, of course we need democracy because like it's just received wisdom. Of course you need democracy. And then I went through this period of like democracy. Why would we need democracy? Like this is we're going to let me get this straight. We're running our society on popularity contests. That's our best idea. Truly? There's no way that's right. And then kind of realizing of it coming back around and realizing, oh, this is load bearing in a bunch of ways that aren't obvious at first, but like you actually can't pull it. It does a thing. It does it's an important coordination mechanism that cannot be wished away. And that you can replace it with alternate coordination mechanisms that then have their own downsides and upsides. But you can't just like will it away. It's doing something. And I would describe like 90% of my intellectual journey in life is sort of this ongoing realization over and over again that like coordination is a cost and a job. It's a real thing people are doing. And like, you can't, in fact, you could argue that coordination is probably one of the most important exports, a sufficient amount of coordination can often supplant the need to do like you can hundredfold your output on food or steel or you know uh therapy or whatever, like with just better coordination. And that most of our problems, the hard problems turn out to be almost entirely coordination problems.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is once you get people aligned and put it in the right direction with a
Right.
goal that makes sense and sufficient information, everybody knows what's going on. The actual problems aren't that hard. They're like relatively easy. Like they're not that trivial, but like mining stuff or like manufacturing is easy once everyone knows exactly what they're doing in the right place at the right time and sufficient how much of what to do. That's most of the work, in fact. And like that gets that is becoming increasingly so with industrialization and computers. That wasn't true perhaps 2,000 years ago. If you're a subsistence farmer, coordination is well, at a very high meta level, your issue actually is 100% you lack coordination. You lack the technologies to enable coordination. But in your day-to-day, coordination wouldn't help you very much. But truly, like what you need is roads and uh, telecommunications and transportation technologies are like that's what makes us rich, way more than manufacturing. Um, give one side roads and telecommunications, and the other side like really great factories for making stuff, and the roads and telecommunications team will smash the team production. That's why I don't understand people who think that infotech is like some weak counterpart to actual production. Like I'd take team infotech against team manufacturing any day. Like it's not even close. You don't pick infotech makes manufacturing better. Manufacturing is required for infotech. So you don't actually pick, but like were you to have a society that had like cell phones and satellites fighting against a society that didn't have them and only had like, guns and no communications and overflight and perfect knowledge of everything all the time, the coordinated team would just smash you with rocks. Like they know exactly where you are at all times. They'd melt. You could never catch them. Like and people really miss that. They miss how important communicate. And so I think and I think as a kid,
Yeah.
I missed that too. It's really not obvious. And so you've like tried to do things without coordination mechanisms and realized, oh man, this shit's hard. It's real hard.
I'm going to put in a request for a coordination thread or a 1 hour TED talk. I think this is a fascinating topic. From for 99% of human history, access to opportunity has been a function of your geography. Over the last 3 decades, that's changed. I think especially from 2020 until now, we've seen this oscillation from like we're starting to recognize the importance of kind of your digital zip code. And then during COVID, it was really important. And now maybe the pendulum has swung slightly back. How important are people's physical versus digital zip codes today? And how do you see that evolving over the near future? And I think it's particularly interesting given you're located in San Francisco, you're assisting YC. There's a lot of geographical components here.
YC's back in person, and not
Yeah,
by
you're very
accident.
active on Twitter at the same time.
Yeah, 100%. I think online is still a deeply much a supplement to in person. Someday that won't be true. Someday we'll have perfect high res, low latency VR with like predictive encoding so that the latency from here to the East Coast doesn't ruin the phone call. But
Mm-hmm.
we're pretty far from that today. There's a reason why all the like top startup, the number of unicorns, however you want to measure it, it's like the Bay Area just dominates everything. Where your physical location matters a lot. Just ask someone who's, in Brazil if it matters that they're in Brazil versus being in the United States. Like it matters. There's more opportunity in the United States than there are in most countries still. That said, it depends a lot on what you're doing. There's certain kinds of jobs. If you're a Twitch streamer, you don't have to be anywhere in particular. You can do that
Mm-hmm.
from pretty much anywhere. Although I'll note they tend to congregate into LA because they want to make the next step in their career. And if you want to be an entertainer, well, you can be a Twitch streamer anywhere. for your entertainment career, it really does help to move to LA. And so they wind up doing it. And like, I think people have overstated death of geography quite a bit.
Hmm.
Um, I think instead, what's really happened is we've added the question, how good are you at using these online tools as well? There's sort of this multiplier between the two. And if you're really good at the online tools, you can actually probably have quite a bit of influence without being geographically local. And if you're doing a great job local, you would gain a lot usually by being better at the online tools. But it's weird. Like I was at a party the other night. I met 3 people who were moving from elsewhere, or people I knew from Twitter who were moving from elsewhere to the Bay Area. 2 of
Hmm.
them said they were moving in whole or in part because I convinced them to online,
Wow.
talking to them. And I actually think the internet's causing more a sort of geography rather than less. Like people are more able and willing to move to the Bay Area because they already have a social network in the Bay
Right.
online. And weirdly, those networks become quite geographically condensed, much more so than you would expect. Like the network I'm in is like Bay Area, New York, and then a smattering of people, London to some degree, and then a smattering of people elsewhere. But like New York, London, Bay Area, like a vacuum pulling those people in. And some people won't move, but like it's I think in a prior era, even fewer of those people would have moved because they wouldn't have felt confident they were able to do it, and now they do.
I think we've seen that with Austin and Miami as well over
Mhm.
the last few years. Um, you get to decide Paul Graham's next essay. What is it and why?
Uh, I mean, the problem with dictating essays to other people is that fundamentally, what makes the really good one is when they get interested in an interesting topic and they're
Yeah.
pulled forward. But if I was to wish Paul was to get interested in a really interesting topic, I really enjoyed this essay. I don't see referenced that often, the refragmentation. That's about it's sort of about how society uh, was more fragmented, got pulled together briefly by media and by uh, production and coordination forces into being temporarily more coherent. And then we've decohered again into a more fragmented society. But this sort of, it's in many ways, it's the refragmentation. It's a return to normal in some ways. Um,
Hmm.
and I thought that was fascinating. And I would want to hear more about, uh, I'm interested in theory if I was like, I think it's interesting when Paul writes about startups, but he's written a lot about startups, and I'm also not actively doing a startup at the moment. I want to hear about uh, society, right? Like, what, uh, what are the forces? What's going on with the level of political, separation or uh, what are the fundamental dynamics of how social media is altering the world? Or, you know, I wouldn't have picked, um, the refragmentation idea. Like, it wouldn't have occurred to me, but to pick that thing, but something in sort of that area of uh, theorizing about what's going on in society. Because like I actually think Paul made a couple mistakes in that essay, not everything, but I think a couple of points. I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that, but like it's an interesting topic, and I think that's for me that's the area of the world I'm most interested in learning about and thinking about right now.
Between Justin TV and Twitch, I think you're uniquely positioned to give a response to this next question. Um, in your opinion, are parasocial hangouts or relationships, so anywhere from streaming to podcasting to reality TV, a net positive or a negative for humanity? And I understand I'm overgeneralizing there. I think there's a gradient here. Um,
Right.
but what's your value judgment on them?
Um, at an individual level, they're definitely a win. I don't think they're like drugs. I think they're like multivitamins. Like there are some things that are like cigarettes where like you might like it, but it's probably not good for you. Um, I don't think this quite fits in that category. I think it's more like you're not getting if you the people I know who get plenty of social interaction might watch some reality TV or listen to some do some parasocial stuff, but it's like they don't do that. The people who are really into it are into it because they're lacking that social vitamin, and this is how they get it.
Is it
And I
is
don't
that
think
at the
I think it's an
cost of
effect, not a
true?
cause.
Is
No,
that
no, no,
at the
that's
cost
my
of?
point. I think it's an
Okay.
effect, not a cause.
Yeah.
They're using it because they lack the social vitamin. It's not the use of it that's causing it. Um, uh, which, in that way, it's like, uh, the people who smoke cigarettes are often people who have a lot of anxiety, and the cigarettes aren't causing the anxiety. Cigarettes treat anxiety. That's why they're smoking. Um, and that's like, I think that's people underestimate that degree to which people are lonely because we've destroyed the fabric of social connection, and they're treating the loneliness with parasocial relationships, which is good because without that they'd be even worse off. Um, and I have several friends for whom, people I've met and people I've heard stories from, for whom Twitch was they were very depressed, they were very lonely, they were in a very dark place, and Twitch was the pathway out. It was the lowest intimacy form of social connection, which they could actually stand. They could do it, and it was a bridge out to more in-depth social connection and eventually being in a better place. And like, I think that's great. I think that's a good thing. It's not a solution. The problem is it's also not a solution to the underlying problem at all.
Right, that was gonna be my next question, is
Yeah.
it's a low barrier, but it's also a partial solution, but are people gonna get trapped in that local maxima and never go pursue
It
the full solution?
I don't think it's that it traps people in the local maximum. It's sort of like it's like, we shouldn't we shouldn't put band-aids on wounds because it'll stop them from like getting don't tourniquet their arm. It'll stop them from getting the gushing blood treated. No, no. If you
Right,
had a thing to treat the gushing blood, they would go do that. The problem is like, what are they supposed to do instead?
right.
What's this alternative thing on offer? And I think that's actually the big question. One of the things I care the most about actually is sort of question of building community. I think it has a lot to do with how we build cities, how we build, architecture, um, our tax structure, a bunch of fundamental things about how we structured society have pushed people in towards this atomized direction.
Mhm.
And we should be doing the opposite and pushing them back away from that and incentivizing. You don't have to incentivize. That's like a little bit paternalistic to the point. Enabling, like
Yeah,
creating an economic framework and a social city structure framework where if what you want is to be part of a social fabric with people who you continue to connect with, and you build a deep relationship with, that's like possible and you don't
yeah.
get priced out. And there's like, there's some way to actually do that in a meaningful way. And I think that is I have a lot of ideas. That is its full own, 10-hour thing. Like if I had a really easy way to do that, I would just go do it. But I think it's very important.
Maybe you can come back on and we can, dig into that one. Um, I don't think you're yet at the I'm not gonna pretend to be inside your head right now, but I'm not sure if you're thinking about what's next after YC. But I am curious about the criteria and the weighting that you'll use to decide what is next.
Mhm.
And maybe if there already are problems or spaces you're considering, I'd love to hear those as well.
Um, I think the most important work to be done today is articulating a positive vision of the future. And it's funny, everyone knows that they talk about it, and you see all these people producing fan art of the vision of the future they'd like to see and desperate to see it, but it's all retreads of like previous
Mm,
visions. And that's because making an actual vision of the future is really, really hard. Um, and weirdly, the only people who seem to do that anymore are actually science fiction authors. Um, maybe they're the only people who ever did.
yeah.
Science fiction authors and like ideologues, some combination of the two,
Yeah.
uh, and philosophers and science fiction authors. And so I guess I want to try to do that. And I don't know if that actually means writing science fiction or philosophy, or there's some other way to address the problem. But like, that's the that's my ambition, is to sort of articulate a vision of the future that is can be inspiring and that can be a vision that other people can build towards and believe it.
Well, the final question I ask everyone to flip it around on you is what's one question you'd leave me and listeners with, whether to think about or act on?
Um, we have a lot of debates in our society that come down to whose ox is going to get gored, which is to say, we only have finite resources, and taking money from X means not having it for Y. And that is just, that is the truth. And there's some amount of, funny money you can print and increase productivity to spread around and whatever. But there's just limits to that. It's after that. Okay, cool. And then it's still finite. We still have finite resources to trade around. And when I look out at the world, uh, I think that that question is fundamentally a zero sum question. And the question I would ask you, and for any listener, is can you find a place where that's not the trade off, where we can just do better, and doesn't require anyone to lose? And I would ask you, why are we spending all this time debating who's the loser and the winner should be over here, instead of figuring out how we do this important thing more efficiently? And what are those places, the things that could be more efficient, where we have plenty of resources? The issue is not resources. In fact, if anything, we could cut the amount of resources in half and get twice as good of an outcome. And how do we do that? What's stopping us, and what can we, what are those areas? Even just identifying and saying it out loud is very helpful for everyone to have the same idea. Well, we're being inefficient about these things. How could we do better?
Is that first or foremost a story or a narrative or a game mechanic? And maybe the two go hand in hand.
I think the question of identifying it is sort of that's a story. It's it's sort of figuring out. And we talked about public schools earlier, right? Public schools, in my mind, are a great example of this. The issue potentially 30 years ago might have been we don't spend enough money, but it certainly isn't that now. We spend tons of money. The question is, why is that not more effective? But what's not effective about that? And I wish I had the answer to that question. Actually, this is why I leave it as the question for the audience.
Yeah,
I think being really interested in that question is very important, because I think that people spend a lot of time interested in the question of, well, should we take this money from this public school and give it to that public school? Or should we tax people more for the public schools? Or should we have this? How do we move the resources around, instead of in my mind, more interesting question of why isn't the resources we're putting there working? What's broken about the system? And that's a fundamentally an analytical question. Actually, I think I have a deep presumption that if we knew what the answer was, we would just do it.
Great point. Excellent. Well, Emmett, thank you so much for your time. This was a blast. And I have a bunch of other questions. I'd love to get to it some other time. But thank you.
It was very fun. Thank you for having me.